a workshop today in engineering ethics. This is part of our professional development series. I'm Natalie Van Tine, EPIC's mentor, and I'll be guiding you through this material to help you get started with this workshop. Here's what we'll cover today. First of all, what do we mean by ethics, and why is it important? We'll move on to introduce you to the ABET Code of Ethics by the Accreditation Board of Engineering and Technology. And then we'll do an engineering ethics case study where we'll analyze the actions of an engineer and his supervisor and put you in the situation of the engineer himself and asking you, if you had this problem, what would you do? Here are our learning objectives for this workshop. After you take this workshop, we expect that you will be able to identify the mission, social context, and implications for policy in the area of engineering ethics, that you'll be able to identify ethical issues that are embedded in complex and ambiguous situations. We'll see this in our case study. And finally, to develop a commitment to public welfare, even when it conflicts with your own economic interest. First of all, what do we mean by ethics? Now, if somebody were to ask you to define this, here's what you might say. It's the study of the standards of conduct and moral judgment. It can also be described as moral philosophy. But more specifically, it's a system or code of morals of a particular person, religion, group, profession, and other types of situations. Now, what you can see from this definition is that every person might view a code of morals or have a code of morals that's a little bit different from that of other people. Certain religions approach this area differently than others. Certain groups or professions may have their own code of ethics or methods of moral judgment that might be different. Now you see where the conflict may come in. More specifically, what we mean by ethics versus normative judgment or morality is that ethics is the study of standards of conduct and moral judgment. It can also refer to standards of correct conduct, but generally includes the study of several different standards. And they may all be valid by themselves, but they may be different and they may conflict. Now, normative judgment is a comparative evaluation that results in a judgment that something is good or bad, right or wrong, or better or worse. And what we mean by morality is a society's accepted norms of behavior. And again, this can vary depending on what type of society in which you're dealing. So in general, what we mean by engineering ethics is the application of rules and standards that govern the conduct of engineers as professionals, as well as the treatment of situations involving uncertainty that are accompanied by conflicting standards and interests. And we're going to ask you to identify some of these conflicting standards and interests in the course of analyzing the case study. So after all, what do we mean by ethical behavior? Now, if we look to Immanuel Kant, the philosopher, he described it as follows. A person's motives determine ethical behavior. Now, because motives can vary from one person to the next, one person's idea of ethical behavior may be different from another's. These motives, though, in order to be considered ethical, need to be grounded in a moral principle. Here's another case where the dilemma may come up. What if there is a conflict between our assigned or contractual duties and our own moral principles? That makes the situation difficult. Here's what else makes it difficult. Ethical problems in engineering are complex. You can have conflicting ethical principles. Maybe you believe one thing and your boss believes another. Oftentimes, these situations do not contain enough information to satisfy us as engineers. We want to have all of the facts, but sometimes all of the facts are not available. There is seldom one right answer. Now, doesn't this sound like EPICS? However, The multiple answers can arise from the multiple conflicting ethical principles. External demands may impact the decision process by which you make the decision. However, you cannot delay making the decision because not making a decision is rarely an option in these cases. So engineers are faced at times with making what's called an ethical compromise. That's where the dynamics of the situation may dictate the type of moral judgment that's being made. Here's a table that shows some of the sources of ethical compromise. And as you can see, this schedule has a scale where 1 is high, 9 is low, and what you can see is the overwhelmingly major source of ethical compromise or situation causing it is schedule pressure. Decision has to be made now. Schedule has to be met. Schedule might have been unrealistic to begin with, but it has to be met. This is accompanied by overly aggressive business objectives. Say the company, in order to remain competitive, had to submit a lower bid for a project than what they believe the project would actually cost in both money and time. In some cases, helping the company survive creates this situation and the need, as seen by the engineer, for compromise. Say the company's in a very competitive business environment, and if they don't get this bid, their viability as a company may be in question. And there are other types of situations here too, and causes that you can see here in this table of lesser importance, but again, may influence a decision. So what do we have to help us? We have a code of ethics for engineers. This is a uniform code that was formed from the codes of ethics of many engineering professional societies that contributed to these fundamental principles, of which there are 4, and fundamental canons, of which there are 7. They form the building blocks for many professional societies' codes of ethics, as well as having arisen from some of them. Here's a table that shows you the relationship between the fundamental principles and the fundamental canons. As you can see on the left, there are 4 principles, and as you can see on the right, there are 7 canons. And there is a relationship between the 2 of them. You will receive a handout which has the code of ethics on one side. And then as you read each principle, compare it to one or more of the canons, and you'll see where the relationships arise. But take a look in particular at the first principle and the first canon, which you can consider to be the most important. Engineers will use their knowledge and welfare and skill for the enhancement of human welfare. And the canon says engineers shall hold paramount, meaning above everything else, safety, health, and welfare of the public in the performance of their professional duties. Now, if you think back on that table we just saw about the cases and causes for ethical compromise, you might very easily see where this conflict is arising. Now let's go on to our case study. And again, on the other side of the handout containing the code, you'll receive a description of our case. Please read the case study thoroughly. First, since this is your copy to keep, feel free to underline keywords or key aspects of the problem as you see it, and where the protagonist here, Wayne Davidson, is going to have a hard time making a decision. Then discuss the problem and the conflicting views that you've identified with your team. And come to a consensus with your team to answer the question at the bottom of the case. If you were Wayne Davidson, what would you do? Then we'll reconvene as a large group and discuss your answers to that question and why you would make that particular decision. The bottom line on all of this to keep in mind is that sooner or later, you will need to make a decision where the path forward or the best solution is not obvious, and what you may end up with is an optimal solution. Consider all points of view. Recognize what's motivating each person's point of view. Is anyone biased? Because if they are, this is going to influence their judgment and how they state their point of view. And they may be acting in the situation with a conflict of interest or something else that is preventing them from making an objective judgment. Use the code of ethics as a guide. It is not a law, that is, if you break it, you'll go to jail, but it's a guide. And it's a way to help you make the decision that will be optimal for everyone and everything that is concerned. But keep in mind that any decision is going to involve risk, no matter what the decision is. The bottom line here is, can you live with your decision? At this point, mentors, go ahead and hand out the case and the code if you haven't already done so. Teams, go ahead and read the case, discuss it, and then reconvene with your mentors to discuss what you would do.